Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where I talk about dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Kung Fu. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we have the opening, obviously, like Nikki and Henry training. And obviously, like, they're like, oh, like, ooh, like, flirty, sexy sparring. And I love they're kind of getting, like, all caught up in the moment and everything. And him being like, oh, you don't have to hold back. And, you know, for him, it's like, yeah, I know you could kick my ass. And he's like, it's hot. And she's like, okay. And then she gets, like, on top of him at the end of it. And then, like, some people nearby have to clear their throat. We're here. And it's like, oh, yeah, thanks for teaching me that stretch. And it's like, yeah. And it's just kind of like this awkward but cute thing. But obviously, it's like they're researching the weapons a little bit more, and it kind of gets Nikki thinking about, like, because obviously they read a little bit more legends about the weapons, that the weapons have, like, this particular glow, but, like, history kind of, like, make it seem like, oh, they were just, that was, like, because I think it was used against Genghis Khan, and he was just kind of like, they're like, oh, he made up that excuse to represent the fact that him and his people got their ass kicked, so... But it turns out, like, no, like, Nikki distinctly remembers the glow, even, like, the smoothness of the handle, but for whatever reason, when she touched it, it burned her, so she believes in the mysticism of it because her, Shifu, like, she remembers one time she saw what seemed to be, like, a hooded woman who just kind of vanished, and obviously Paylene told her, it's like, you know, you came here with just kind of, like, your logic and order, but now, like, listening to all these other ladies' stories here, you've kind of opened up your worldview. You're able to see that, like, yes, there are just some unknown aspects and presences in this world, kind of, you know, opening up the more mystical side of things, that there is more to this world, and you're kind of opening your eyes to kind of seeing it, so that, and once again, for me personally, it's like, okay, dude, does that mean I shift this show over to a super fantasy fight? Because we are going to be, like, the weapons were already, like, a mystical element, but it hasn't gone, like, full-blown mystical in certain regards, but in other regards it has. Till now, just still stay on Untitled Review. Once again, I'm just anal retentive, so that's just kind of my own little thing. But also, like, Henry and Nikki's situation, like, you know, researching the weapons and stuff like that, now knowing, like, each one of the weapons, even the scabbard to the sword, gives off the green glow, because it's basically something to do with, like, the obsidian in it, so, like, when the light hits it just right, it glows. So, like, this is their way to be able to track all the weapons. Henry puts into a call for Randall. Man, Randall's got an extensive network. It's like, yo, Henry, like, got the hookup, because you're like, because at first you're thinking, like, oh, Henry's, like, Randall's, like, small time or something. It's like, nah, he's got people all over the place. Even later on, it's like, at the end of the episode, it's like, oh, here's a dig site, and it's like, wait, what? And these guys hit up Randall. Like, Randall's got sources, he's got feelers out in the world. It's like, yo, Randall's running a large-scale operation. It's like, maybe we'll get to spend more time with Randall and kind of find out. Maybe he'll just always be kind of like a background thing of, like, we don't see him, but he's kind of operating in the background in certain aspects of it. But I thought that was such an interesting development. I was like, wow, that's crazy to think that. Because obviously at the end of the episode, they end up finding a new weapon. But that also becomes a conversation, too, where, like, Nikki and Henry, that's kind of, like, the foundation of their, like, you know, it's like, yeah, they're kicking it, like, things are hitting off between them. But it's also, like, for Nikki, she talks about the fact that she's like, yeah, sorry, I can be a little one-track, like, when it comes to my mind about, like, trying to, like, because the sooner they find these weapons, the sooner they can keep them out of Jilon's hands. But Henry's like, no, like, I wouldn't call it one-track minded, I'd call it focus. And for him, it's like, this is your quest, and I know how important it is to you, so I'm glad just to be a part of it, you know? Which, you know, obviously that conversation comes up later on between, like, Henry as well as Ryan about, like, right, where they stand with everyone else, like, where he stands with Nikki, where Ryan stands with Joe. It's like a conversation of, like, yeah, these people that are important to us, they're dealing with a lot right now, and neither, right, like, it doesn't seem like the right time to bring up the fact is of, like, right, like, where do we stand? You know, DTR, and it's like, what? Define the relationship, and it's like, you know, are we casual? Are we boyfriends? You know, and same thing applies in Nikki and Henry's case. So, you know, so it was some interesting developments on that front, but also I think this was kind of a very important episode, just kind of reflecting a lot of, you know, everything going on, because leaving the restaurant earlier in the episode, Henry and Nikki come across a scene, and it turns out the kid that they had run into earlier on his skateboard got shot by the cops. They were like, he was just skateboarding in a wrong place, and they, like, cops were saying, thought he was breaking it, and they shot him. It's like the kid was unarmed, you know. And now that becomes, Joe being the activist he is, he's getting people from BLM and just like the San Francisco area gathered together, like, to do a protest. And so, and it's an interesting thing because earlier in the episode, Jen and Mei were talking about, they knew someone, like, oh, the prices are kind of going up, but also like, it's kind of like everyone's trying to make ends meet, and it's like, oh, we could always go over to this area because things are cheaper, and it's like, well, we can't because I heard someone like just went over there, and I think it was someone they knew like got attacked, and she was in the hospital, and for Mei says the line of 20 years later, and just nothing's changed, And so obviously through the episode, like obviously about the Andre situation that came up, and obviously at first it seems like, Jen's the only one that's sympathetic because like some of the episode, Mei is just kind of like, no, like, it's like she's focusing on like what this means, like, kind of like the other side of it, rather focusing on the young man that shot. She's like, I'm sorry for, what happened to him, but also it's like what this, could mean for like everything going on, especially later on when it's like their store gets vandalized, like, and that's always a complicated thing about like a protest. Like there's people who are just using it as an excuse. There are the people who are just like legitimately here fighting for the cause. Other people just use it as an opportunity. It's like they want to make it seem like, oh, like I'm doing, it's like, no, but you're ruining businesses. These are people's livelihoods, like, especially because a lot of these, in particular, in their case, it's like this is a mom and pop shop. So it's a situation where you can understand Mei Lee's like reservation to be like, let's just board up the shop, let's close. And it's like, whoa, mom, like, shouldn't we help? But she's like, no, because if we help, we're just going to invite more of that. It is that complicated thing of, and I think this applies in many regards where it's like, and I don't hold like any resentment to Mei Lee because I kind of understand where she comes from, especially when she explains things later on. But it is a thing of like, when you're kind of struggling in your own right, like it's a situation where like when shit gets real and scary, like you can kind of turn inwards. It's kind of like, I'm gonna look out for mine, it can become like that. It's not just Mei Lee. Like a lot of people get like that sometimes, where it's like you get very defensive and like you kind of block out the world because you just, because even at one point she's like, oh, turn off, like, oh, no one needs to see the news this early in the morning, because obviously everything got heated even more the moment Andre died. And that ends up playing an interesting conversation too, because, when Henry, because like for Henry, it's like, like all they're doing on some places in the news is talking about his past. Like he went to juvie, like he did like some like stealing or whatever when he was like 15 or whatever. And obviously we know about Henry's past. So I think when Henry hears about what happened to Andre, it's like, that's all they're focused on, going to his past. Like what Henry's done with his life after, like, mistakes of his youth. Like, I think he sees himself in Andre. Like, that could have easily just been me. And it's like, the news isn't focusing on this, him going to the community college, him doing this and that, like, all the good aspect. They just want to focus on a negative past. Like, and sadly, that's something that real life comes up too often, where it's like, oh, we just want to paint. It's like, oh, we want to just like, oh, let's bring up this person's past. It's like, it's not relevant to this moment. What was he doing? He was skateboarding, But they want to justify it because they thought he was breaking in, and it's like, oh, look at this past. He has a past of breaking. Like that's why they want to just kind of associate that. But I think, like I said, it hit close to home for Henry, because like that story, I think for him, it's like that could have easily been me, like a kid trying to like, leave his past behind and try to move forward. You have Ryan being there for Joe. It's like, it's like regardless of what our relationship is, I want to be there for him. I want to help out, like, potentially like people could need medical help or whatever, like, at protests and stuff like that. He was like, I looked it up, and like, tents would be kind of a good thing to kind of help out. And, him being a doctor, he helps out because obviously he helps out the community as well. So just trying to do whatever he can to help. Obviously, the police kind of start, breaking things up, and people are kind of scattered, and it's like a curfew is happening. Because early in the episode, there's also like, Jen was like, like he was helping out. Their mom was, Mei Ling was staying inside, but for Jen, it's like, oh, he started handing out water. But you could tell, like, immediately, like, it isn't a thing of, like, that this has, like, you could tell it was affecting Mei Lee, because, like, she was watching the news, and she was watching Andre's mom talk, who's the actress who plays Light in Snowpiercer. But for her, it's like, my son said, no, sir, yes, sir, and knew not to kind of, cause any fuss or any, like, just kept to himself, like, knew what he needed to do to kind of live his life. And it's once again, that's the sad thing, that you have to be on pins and needles just to live your life. And you could tell how much it was hitting Mei Lee. And that, in my mind, and I think that ends up being a thing too. It's like, because the outside world, this whole circumstance, it's scary, because I think for Mei Lee, it makes you kind of like look inwards and make you go, that could easily be one of my kids. You know, I'm a parent, like, that was some poor young boy that could have easily been one of my kids, especially when she kind of talks about it later on. Because for her, it's like, she finds out Ryan was involved. It's like, no, you could have gotten arrested. You know, because it's also like, with everything that's going on, like, because the police are roaming the streets, telling people to get off the streets, and Mei Lee kind of wants to block everything off, like, let's not let anyone in. They let Joe in and a couple people, because it's like one guy got tear gassed or maced or tear gassed in the face, but Nikki was like, no, like, we shouldn't act out of fear, you know, as like Paylene had taught her. So she opens up, like, lets other people come in too, because like, if they were left on the street, they could have gotten arrested too for just being out on the street. So it's like trying to do all that they can, you know. Althea trying to make tea for everyone to kind of calm not only their mom down, but everyone else. Well, which, hell, even Althea's dealing with, like, obviously she was looking at something online and came across, like, the business her former boss owns and everything, and it just brings it all back. And she wants to talk to Dennis about it, but Dennis is so excited about her trip and everything. And for it's a situation where Althea was kind of looking for an out to not talk about it, because for her it's like, oh, Dennis wants to have fun, and like, yeah, I you know, she's probably thinking like, I don't want to bog him down with this. She's going like, oh, it was no big deal, I didn't want to talk, it wasn't anything. It's like, because he was like, oh, let's go on this trip. My thought immediately was like, I hope it's not a terrible situation where like they go on this trip and she runs into her boss, like being stuck on like a ship or whatever, like with your abuser. Like, I was hoping like it doesn't turn into something like that. But obviously, like, Nikki's checking in on her. But it's a whole thing of, like, she's doing this juice cleanse. She's, like, focusing on the wedding and the flowers and stuff. Because she tells about it later on, because there's so many other aspects of her life she can't control. It's nice to at least to be able to take back some control in these small avenues of her life, with the wedding, the flowers, the juicing, and stuff like that. So it's just so that she doesn't have to focus on that particular thing. And it's like, you should tell Dennis, so, like, you know, he would want it, so you don't have to just carry this by yourself. But it's also like, for her, I think it's just, once again, it's the thing of telling it to someone makes it real, especially Dennis. It's like, I think for her, it's like she wants to kind of focus on the good side of the relationship and everything. And I think bringing this in, like, she's afraid of what that might do to the relationship, like the knowledge of what happened, what she went through, you know. Because it's also the thing of, right, their parents also still don't know either. So Nikki's trying to be there for her sister without pushing her for it. But it's also a thing of just being like, maybe you should open up to Dennis about it, you know, so that you don't have to carry this on your own. But some other aspects to the episode is Joe, there's a warrant out for Joe. Evan ends up showing up at the restaurant, letting Nikki know what's what. That basically they're trying to say that Joe incited like a riot, and that's why the police are after him. But it's like, Joe did nothing wrong. But it's like, for Joe, it's like, no matter what the case may be, I still should be arrested just because things are clean. Like, don't fight, because the more we resist, the more of an issue it can be, because it's not just about me. Everyone else could get dragged into this well, so we'll fight it on the B side. Like, after I get arrested, then we start calling in favors and like trying to handle it on that side. But for now, don't give them an excuse to kind of turn this into something that it's not. We don't want anything to turn violent. We don't want them to have an excuse to turn violent either. So Joe is going to hand himself over. But for Ryan and everything, it's like, it's not right. Like, he didn't do anything wrong, you know. So when the time comes, like, everyone comes together, everyone in the restaurant. Mei Ling, Jen, Althea, Ryan, even Henry being like, arrest me, you know. And it's like, and then Althea's able to bring up, like, see, this is the video timestamped and everything, shows that Joe didn't incite anything. He was telling for a peaceful protest. So it's like, it shut down like them coming after him. So it's like, right, so you say he was inciting stuff, doesn't look like he was. So everyone having his back in that moment. And obviously, like I said, Mei Ling talks about a little bit of her circumstance of like why she felt the way she did. Like, it's like, it's not that I didn't feel anything for what happened to Andre. It's just, it made her think back to, it's like they told a story to the kids, like, about a dragon coming in to see them, like, when they were younger, because there was a broken window. And it's like, because years ago, someone threw a brick through their window and said, go home. And it's like the derogatory term for someone that's Asian, and they came up with this cover story just to make it, because also that was like, it's their restaurant, but also the kids were there, and just like, it's just like this one hateful word, it stuck out to her, and because that was a complicated thing for her, because it's even something Nikki brought up earlier in the episode. It's like, you didn't even call the cops, even you don't trust the cops, because like when the vandalism happened, because it's a situation of, you know, and this is what I was talking about, where it's a thing of like, I think, you know, it's a situation where, you know, minorities all across the board, Black, Asian, you know, like, have very similar struggles. Like, you know, you can make some arguments about like the severities and stuff like that, but it just in general, like, there are people in general who have struggles, but definitely minorities. And, you know, this was a situation of her, like, what happened to Andre just made her go back to that, because it's like, this world is filled with so many people who are going to hate you just because of who you are. And Andre, like, it made her relive that. It made her think of like, yeah, this poor young boy died just because of like, because of color of his skin, because of who he is. And she got scared because it's like, she didn't want to focus on that, because it reminded her of like, right, like you kind of want to believe in the betterment of humanity, but then like some humans ruin it by being like, oh, pieces of shit who hate people just because they look different, because they are different, because they're from somewhere different. And so, once again, it's that thing of like, it just made her scared, because I think for her, it was a situation of like, and especially hearing Andre's mom talk, it's just like, that could easily be one of my kids. One of my kids could have been in that circumstance just because they're different. There's so much hate in the world. Like, you know, we already heard a little bit earlier in the episode, like I brought up about the Jen and Maylene talking about the person that they knew who was hurt, just and told to go back to China, you know? So it's like, why didn't you ever tell us like the real story from you? And, you know, why'd you come up with the dragon thing? It's like, because we didn't want to, you know, scare you. Like, that there's a world, we live in a world where people will hate you, you know? And for her, it's like, it wasn't like that was that long ago. I think they were saying that was like 2004 that flashback took place. And I think that's also why I say it's a very important episode, because, you know, not just for like, you know, on the Black side of things, but also on the Asian side of things. Like, there are plenty of Asian people that would tell you like, oh, what's happening now, it's on a bigger, more public scale, in a sense of like, it's getting more like media attention, but it's like, this has always been happening. It's just, you know, a lot of people who are hateful just are giving themselves a quote unquote like justifiable excuse. They'll justify being like, oh, like blah 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 blah, because of modern day, they're already hateful, they just want another excuse to be able to justify their hate. You know, so it is that thing of like, obviously you know, and it's something Henry talks about later on, that the fact is, this is a fight, you know, but, you know, this fight takes time. It's not something that's going to be resolved all at once. And yes, it can seem like, you know, there's no progress, but there has been progress, and there continues to be progress, but it is a long, long, long fight. It shouldn't be, but sadly it is, you know? And like I said, I just think this is a beautiful representation of just like, right, like the struggles like everyone's kind of going through. And it is a thing of like, you know, people, a community coming together, you know, being there for each other, like kind of righting the wrongs that are clear, you know? You know, Joe and Ryan, you know, Joe's kind of like, yeah, I'm sorry for leaving you hanging. And like Ryan's like, no, I completely understand what you're dealing with right now. And it's like, whatever you need, I'm going to be right by your side. And Joe kisses him and is like, this is what I need, you know? And so, even see Maylee drop off some flowers at that, I guess vigil. I don't know if that'd be the right word, because I know the vigil is the actual gathering itself. But like, obviously, like the memorial for like Ryan, and then Maylee looks at, you know, Andre's mom. Once again, it's like, I think she's putting herself in Andre's mom's shoes of like, that could easily be me. Like the fact this poor woman losing a child just because, you know, people in this world can be so hateful, you know. So I thought it was just an interesting and a very like timely episode in that regard. Like I said, in many different fronts of like, you know, a reminder too of like, we're all in this together. Like, we have to come together to kind of stop, you know, these injustices in the world that like, you know, because it can easily become a thing of, I protect mine, I you know, you kind of keep to yourself. But obviously like BLM isn't just about, you know, it's about all lives mattering. That's the point of BLM. So it's like, once again, a thing of us all coming together, you know. fighting the injustices, the wrongs, the hate in the world, so that's just kind of, my thoughts on things, so. But, I'm interested to see where everything ends up taking us going forward into the next episode, but, really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.